Hey, it's an honor for me to be here, humbled to get to share this time with you, to talk about this concept of friendship. And when Ben asked me, and I kind of started reflecting and thinking about friendships that have had a deep impact in my life, I realized this topic of friendship has been one of the most significant tools and instruments that God has used to shape and to form my life in multiple arenas. So I think what we're going to talk about is fundamentally important for how we pursue Jesus, for how we do relationships in general, and how we do life well in a way that's God-honoring. So as we flesh out this idea of friendship tonight, I want to start with a story that I think highlights some of the tensions that we might wrestle with around this concept of friendship. So in college, I had the opportunity to do an internship in the great state of Michigan. And as part of this internship, they placed us with host families because it's an internship, so they paid us almost no money. So they placed us with this host family, and their responsibility is to feed us, is to provide us a place to stay, and sort of have like a family environment where we get connected. So I hit kind of what I think was the host family jackpot. They had a beautiful home. They had a big screen TV before everybody had a big screen TV. I mean, you guys take it for granted. When I was little, TVs were still made of glass and were like this thick, right? This big around. So these people had like a 55-inch TV, which at the time was huge. They had one of those Holiday Inn Express waffle makers, you know, where you pour in the batter, you turn it over and it beeps. 2 minutes, you got waffles. It was amazing. So I'm like living the dream in this house. And I'm kind of awe-inspired as I walk in and they show me to my room, which had like an ensuite bathroom. I thought, this is amazing. And so I walk into my room and I set my stuff down and they had this beautiful like picture window and I go over there to pull the blinds up to let the sun in and I pull that little string thing and the blinds snap in half and fall out the window. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm in this like $750,000 home and I like Hulkman rip the blinds out of the window, right? So they're downstairs getting dinner ready and I walk down, I'm like, hey, thanks for opening your home, ripped your blinds out of the window. No big deal. And they were super gracious, like, oh, yeah, we'll fix it. Don't worry about it. Well, a couple weeks later, right, so there's that awkward moment in the mix, right? Keep that in mind a little bit. So a couple weeks later, they're off at a baseball tournament, and they're gone all day. So I wake up, and I think, man, I got the house to myself, so I've got the TV on, and I'm cranking out Holiday Inn waffles like it's my job, right? So waffle number 2 in front of the big screen TV, I hear this sound of water running. I'm like, what is that sound? So I reluctantly set that beautiful waffle down and I walk upstairs and I follow it and I realize the bathroom that's connected to my room, the toilet is just running and running, like the handle got stuck. So I lift the tank off and I think, oh, just like this thing that shuts off the valve just got stuck. So I'm just gonna tap it up. Guys, I don't know what the deal was, if it was the waffles or what. I go to tap this thing up and I snap it off in my hand. So I've ripped the blinds out of the window. I now break their toilet, and I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me, right? They're going to think, who's this guy that's destroying our home, one appliance, one thing at a time? So in my mind, I like extrapolate this out. I think it's going to be super awkward how do you tell this super nice family, hey, I broke your toilet? Like, how do you lead into that conversation? What's the lead up to that? And so I think maybe if I just pack my stuff up, I can leave and I'll be gone before they get back and I'll just totally ghost them. Be like, internship? I didn't have an internship. I've been in Indiana this whole time. I didn't go anywhere. So then because I don't handle stress well, the next best thing that I think is I'm just gonna take a nap. So literally I go into the next room and I'm laying in bed with my eyes closed, but I'm so anxious I can't sleep. And then it hits me. You are a junior in college. You are a competent, capable man. You can fix this, right? So you guys are ahead of me. I drive to the hardware store and I get this piece of plumbing and I get back and now I get in my handyman's attire, which was basketball shorts and a grungy white t-shirt. And I pull the tank off the toilet again and I start taking apart the plumbing. Rule number 1, I'm not a plumber. Rule number 1, drain the tank first. I chose not to do that. So I pull this piece of plumbing out and I proceed to fill their bathroom with toilet water. So now I'm grabbing towels from the sink and I'm wiping them up. So they're nice, like beautiful towels that are fluffier than any towels I've ever owned. I'm wiping up toilet water. I'm now drenched, all because in my mind, I had this on my own. I didn't need anybody's help. I can do this. So I finally get this new piece of plumbing in, and it's working, and it sort of flushes as good as it used to before I broke everything. And so I have this bucket of toilet water. I have a piece of their plumbing, and I'm sopping wet, and I think, here's my plan. They'll never know. I'm going to run outside, I will dump the toilet water, I will throw the plumbing away, shut the lid, change clothes, and be eating waffles again by the time they get home. So I run out the garage door, and I get to the middle of the garage floor, 3-stall garage, so it's wide, middle of the door. The worst sound of my life. The garage door goes up. I wish I could tell you this was made up. I'm not even kidding. The garage door goes up. Now flip perspectives. Think about what this family is seeing. I've got this sopping wet, dirty white V-neck t-shirt on. I have a bucket of water and a piece of their plumbing in my hand, right? No joke. And so the door goes up and I see their heads do this. So the rolls down the window goes, did you decide to do some plumbing while we were gone? And so I proceeded to tell them what happened. And they were super gracious. They've never had an intern again. So I think I broke the system, and they're like, yeah, that was a disaster. That cost us more money than it was ever worth. We had no idea. But two things I want you to notice in that story. Number one was when I entered this awkward moment, I extrapolated it out in my mind, and I said, I cannot have this awkward conversation. Guys, if I literally would have told them, hey, I broke your toilet, they'd have been like, yeah, no problem. That thing was corroded anyway, right? But I didn't know how to enter this awkward moment and just have an honest conversation. On the other side of things, I was functioning with this mentality that said, I am capable and competent on my own. I can do this. I can fix this. I have this issue, but I'm not going to invite anyone else into the situation. I will just sort of fix it, cover it up, move on, and no one will ever know that it's broken. And listen, I think sometimes the way we do friendships is similar. We enter a sort of semi-awkward moment and we don't know how to do it. So we say, you know what, I'm just going to leave this relationship behind, and we just totally ghost that person and never speak to them again. Because we don't know how to navigate what feels like a sort of tension-filled moment, or we don't know how to navigate conflict or an awkward relational moment. For others of us, maybe you've been wounded, maybe you've had a situation where you got vulnerable and somebody betrayed you. And so for some of us, we have made this agreement in our mind that says, I don't need anybody, I am competent, I am capable, I will live life independently, and I will never let somebody else into a place where they can wound me again. And we cut ourselves off from friendships, walling ourselves into a life of independence. And people might even think you have friendships because you know people, but you know deep inside that you are keeping those relationships at a safe and a comfortable distance. And so tonight I want to talk about why friendships matter and why I think God calls us to deep and intimate friendships that are incredibly formative in our lives. So first, let me answer this question. If friendships are so important, why are they so hard? What are some roadblocks that you and I feel in the process of forming friendships? And I've got 4 things that I think for us in the season of life maybe that we're navigating that are roadblocks to friendship. Number 1 is this. I think we get so used to convenience that we don't know how to do intentionality. And what I mean by that is you are in a season of life as college students and young adults where you have the privilege of relational convenience. You were surrounded by people who were largely the same age, largely in a similar demographic of life from you, and they build these residence halls and they throw a ton of people in there, and community just happens there. Now, not all of it's good, right? Some of it's the fight with your roommate because they never take out the trash, or the conflicts that you have. But it's an environment, you're doing life together in proximity. By and large, relational connection is convenient. Now, as I talk to young adults that are transitioning to life post-college, one of the most common conversation I have is this. Nobody prepared me for how to find friends after college. Because suddenly you step into maybe a career job or a 9-to-5 job somewhere, and suddenly it's a diverse environment of people, and they work different hours, and they're in different phases of life from you, and we haven't learned how to be intentional, and so when relationships aren't convenient, we don't know how to do friendship. The second roadblock I think that we wrestle with is this. We've bought into this idea that the dating relationship is more important than the friendship relationship. So for some of us, if we're honest, when Ben maybe announced, hey, we're doing a relationship series, we're calling it Honor, probably for most of you, you were like, I wonder what he's going to say about dating. Because we feel this social pressure, right? You go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas or a 3-day weekend, I get it, right? Grandma's there and she's like, so is there a special guy, special girl in your life? Or that overzealous aunt at Thanksgiving and you're like, I really just don't want to have this conversation right now, right? I had somebody ask me, my wife was the only girl I dated. I went on blind dates, but like serious relationships, she was the only one that I really seriously dated. And that wasn't until second semester of my senior year. So first semester of my senior year, a friend of mine, who I've since cut out of my life, he said, thank you. I appreciate that laugh. Even if it was a pity laugh, I appreciate it. We had this conversation, first semester of my senior year. He goes, dude, what are you going to do? I said, I'm sorry, what do you mean? He goes, you're single and you're a senior. What are you going to do? I said, well, I still don't understand what you're saying. And he goes, when we graduate, there's like no people. And I was like, is it like the plague is coming? Like, what do you know that I don't know? And he's like, but you know, like after college, how do you find people? What are you going to do? I was like, I don't know. What's the male version of a cat lady? I'll just do that. Right? But there's this social pressure, like you have to have dating figured out. The problem is we've never figured out how to do intimate relationships and friendship. And so we enter a dating relationship and things start getting deep and we don't know how to navigate that because we haven't cultivated healthy friendships well. Third roadblock that I think we encounter is we're still learning self-awareness and how we do relationships. I mean, in college was the first time I had to navigate significant conflict in my life. No joke, Dave, who's sitting right over there, our first real fight in college, he made this bold statement. He said, tiredness is a choice. They agree with me, right? Tiredness, like, I kid you not, like I almost quit speaking to him over his statement that tiredness is a choice. And I thought, bro, I'm tired right now. I'm too tired to fight or I would fight you right now. But I'm choosing to be tired apparently, right? That was his argument. But I didn't know how to navigate conflict. In another moment, a deep friend of mine said something in an offhanded way that wounded me. And I literally, mid-sentence, I looked at him and I walked out of the room and ended the conversation. I didn't know how to do conflict. Nobody had taught me how to navigate that. When I did conflicts with my parents, honestly, I was just disrespectful most of the time. I didn't care about their emotional well-being. We had conflict. I said things I probably shouldn't have said and walked out of the room. And they're my parents, so they have to love me so I could get away with it. But now in friendships, I didn't know how to do conflict. And it's a roadblock because we're in this phase and season of life where we're trying to figure out, what does this look like? Fourth roadblock is this. It's pride versus humility. Right? For some of us, we're not willing to open our lives up in vulnerability, that humility begins to cultivate in our lives. And deep friendships require humility that allows vulnerability to take place. And for some of us, it's easier to function in a place of pride that says, I'm competent, I'm capable, I have everything I need. I'll invite people in to a certain point, but no further. Because we're afraid of getting hurt or wounded, or we just don't know how to cultivate that relationship. So here's the question. Why are friendships so important? Let me start off this idea with Proverbs 18:24. And I think this will set the stage for us to understand why friendships are so important. Proverbs 18:24 says this, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. Listen to that. He says, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. Now, in my mind, if that's what the writer of Proverbs is saying, then the opposite must be true. That one who has reliable friends has a life in which they are encouraging and cultivating their well-being and their flourishing. Friendship are a means through which God encourages us and cultivates our sense of well-being, our sense of flourishing. I mean, think about the profound nature of that statement. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. He says, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. He says there's this kind of relationship, this kind of friendship that's so deep that someone is willing to go with you where even maybe a blood-related person won't. And he says those friends who are reliable, who stick with you in life, they build into our sense of flourishing and our sense of well-being. So if that's true and relationships are fundamentally important, the question then is how do we cultivate them? How do we build deep and healthy and intimate friendships? And by the way, has anybody been bothered yet by the fact that I've used the word intimate 3 times to describe friendship? right? When I've said intimate, you're immediately thinking intimate. That's what I do with my wife or girlfriend, right? Right context is church, right? I'm just kidding. And I think that speaks to this reality. On the one hand, that we equate intimacy with sexuality, but we don't think about intimacy as an opening up of one's life and allowing someone to see the inner state of your heart, soul, and life. And so we do it alone. So as we talk about how to cultivate friendships, I want to look at this through the lens of two of maybe the greatest friends that ever lived, and it's David and Jonathan. Now, as I flesh out their story for you, it's important to understand a little snapshot of the history of Israel. The people of Israel, by the time Samuel the prophet is on the scene, the people of Israel are hungry for a king. Right? They've had judges, they've had prophets, they've had people that God has set over them to bring wisdom and direction and insight into their life. But the people of Israel, as a nation, they look at all the nations around them and they're like, we want a king. They have a king. Why can't we have a king? And reluctantly, because God wanted to be the king of the people of Israel, reluctantly God tells Israel, listen, I'm going to give you a king, but it's not going to be what you think. And so God gives the people of Israel a man named Saul to be their king. Now, Saul pretty quickly demonstrates himself to be a man that lacks integrity, that lacks character, that lacks obedience, and he begins to rule and reign in Israel in a way that bears witness to his disobedience to God's plan, purpose, and direction. Now, Saul has a son named Jonathan, and Jonathan has this dear friend named David. And in 1 Samuel, it says that Saul and David are one in spirit, right? There's intimacy. They're one in spirit. And it says that Jonathan loved David. And they begin to cultivate this deep friendship. Now, this all gets complicated because David soon begins to distinguish himself as a leader in the people of Israel. And God pronounces this judgment that Saul will no longer be king, and in fact, David is going to be king. And in the nation of Israel, people began to sing this song. They would say, Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s. And what they're saying is, Saul's a leader, sort of, but David is a real leader. And now Saul gets incredibly jealous, and he begins to make threats on David's life, but it's dicey because Saul's son Jonathan is close friends with David. And as we watch how their friendship plays out, I think we begin to get a framework of understanding what deep friendship looks like. So 1 Samuel 23, we're going to start to walk through their story. 1 Samuel 23:15. Now this is a place in the story of David and Jonathan where Jonathan's father Saul has just made a threat on David's life. And David runs away and goes into a place of hiding. This is what happens. 1 Samuel 23:15. While David was at Horesh in the desert at Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and Jonathan went home, and David remained at Horesh. So one of the first things I think that we see in their relationship is this idea that they lived out this concept that I'm going to call constancy. Weird word, right? So it's sort of a melding of two words, consistency and constant. And what I mean by this is there is a persistent, intentional presence over time. It's consistent and it's constant. And here's what I mean. David has just had a threat made on his life by Jonathan's dad. And David is out hiding in the desert. And Jonathan, this is a great moment. If you wanted to end a friendship, it would be a great moment for Jonathan to go to David and be like, dude, my dad wants to kill you. You're hiding in the desert. I can't go there. But what is so astonishing to me is that even when it's inconvenient, when Jonathan's dad Saul wants to kill his best friend David, did you notice what this text said? It said that Jonathan went out to David. And this idea of constancy in relationships, in friendships, tells me this, that true friendships are still there even when it's not convenient. Even when it's difficult, even when we have to push in, even when we have to be intentional. And by the way, David is not hanging out in some cool place. He's hanging out in the wilderness, in the desert. This is not a place where it's like, hey bro, why don't you come over? We'll kick it in the desert. No, like nobody hangs out in the desert. Water and food are scarce. David is essentially an outlaw, but Jonathan chooses to stick by him. He bears David's burden with him. I mean, imagine what Jonathan is thinking. Like, is my dad Saul? Is he going to be ticked that I'm hanging out with David? But even when it has the potential to be incredibly inconvenient, Jonathan has a consistent and constant presence in David's life. Proverbs 17:17 says it this way: a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. That two little words, a friend loves at all times, not just in easy times, not inconvenient times, in all times. And by the way, did you notice Jonathan's humility? He said, listen, David, he says, you're going to be king and I will be second to you. Jonathan is literally the son of the king, the current king. He has a shot at being king someday, but he looks at David and he says, no. He says, I know you're the leader. You will be in that position of leadership and I will be happy to humbly serve you, even when it means being in a lower hierarchical position. He practices constancy, consistent, persistent presence over time. So what's the second component that we see in David and Jonathan's relationship? I think what we see is this. It's this idea of intentionality. And what I mean by intentionality is that David and Jonathan are purposeful in how they do relationship. They are purposeful in how they cultivate their friendship. And primarily, I think there's three ways that they demonstrate this idea of intentionality. I think you see it broadly in just the relational connection. They're purposeful in how they build and cultivated their relationship. They are intentional spiritually, and they are intentional emotionally. Let me flesh this out for you. Let me go back to this text. 1 Samuel 23:15. While David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life, and Saul's son Jonathan went out to David. Right? Even when it's not convenient, he is intentionally, relationally pursuing David, even when it might cost him something. He's taking on his burden. But notice what it says, verse 16. He went to David at Horesh. Listen, and it says he helped him find strength in God. That's the spiritual intentionality. And honestly, this is one of the places I think where our friendships are lacking the most. It's easy to get together and make small talk, but when was the last time you pushed into your friend's heart and soul and said, hey, what's God doing in your heart and life? What is God teaching you? How is the Holy Spirit just wrecking your life this week in the best way possible? And I love that Jonathan comes out to David and he invests in him spiritually and he helps David in this place where David is crushed. He helps him find a renewed sense of strength in God, pointing him back to the spiritual reality. Now, the other thing that struck me about this is Jonathan's emotional intentionality. Because he recognizes that David is in a place where his spirit is crushed. He recognizes that David is in a place where he feels weak and vulnerable spiritually. And Jonathan recognizes that emotional just despair in David. And he goes out to him in intentionality, helps him find renewed strength in God because he's emotionally aware of David's spirit and how he's doing. Now, it's one of those things when we talk about emotional intentionality. There's two broad things I see take place here. For some of the dudes in the room, we saw emotional intentionality and we're like, I'm not really the emotional type, right? And I love it when guys say this to me because I think it's a cultural like stereotype that guys aren't emotional, and so we adopt this persona that to show emotion is weakness. But the number of guys who I have been in relationships with and friendships with who say I'm not emotional, but they have these angry outbursts where insecurities that they've never processed with anyone come out in these angry outbursts. I'm like, dude, there's your emotions. You just haven't dealt with them and cultivated them in a healthy way. Don't tell me you're not emotional. You just haven't been intentionally emotional to process your stuff and invite others into the process. Now, on the other side of this, sometimes I see women who have been wounded and they shut down their heart and say, I'm not going to invite anybody else in. And they guard their heart in a way that becomes calloused and calcified and afraid to risk again. And this becomes difficult to be emotionally intentional and vulnerable. And I think what happens is sarcasm begins to take root. And listen, sarcasm can be really funny. I get it. Like, I know some sarcastic people, it's like, that might be your spiritual gift. You're sarcastic and it's really funny and you do it in a way that's not damaging, right? But I think for others of us, sarcasm has become the passive-aggressive way to tell our friends, hey, you really annoy me and this thing that you did really hurt. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm just going to make a joke at your expense and then we'll all laugh about it. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Now, listen to the way the Bible talks about this. In Proverbs 25:20, I love this. Sometimes the Bible's like, that hurts. Listen to this. Proverbs 25:20. Like a maniac shooting flaming arrows of death. Whew. It's like, all right, don't mince any words. Like a maniac shooting flaming arrows of death is one who deceives their neighbor and says, I was only joking. Listen to the profound nature of what the writer of Proverbs is saying there. The person who goes to their neighbor and deceives them and then says, no, I'm just kidding. The writer of Proverbs says, you are like a maniac, someone who is carelessly shooting arrows of death. And there are many times passive-aggressively, we speak death into the life of a friend because we don't know how to do conflict and how to speak truth in a way that's constructive. And so we wound in an emotionally unintentional way. And friendship is an invitation when it's godly to deal with our brokenness in community with others, because our woundedness and our brokenness is inflicted relationally and communally from others, and it has to be healed relationally and communally with God and community with other people. Now, the third component that I see in David and Jonathan's relationship is this idea of candor. And what I mean by candor is the willingness to speak truth into the life of another. And so there's this moment in 1 Samuel chapter 20. Let me read this for you. 1 Samuel 20, verse 5. So David said, look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I'm supposed to dine with the king. He says, but let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. He says, if your father misses me at all, tell him David really would like your permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because of the sacrifice to be made there. Right? So, too long didn't read version. David's supposed to eat dinner with the king. He's not sure if Saul's going to like him. All right? So that's where we're at. Verse 7, if he says, very well, then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he's determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant. Right? David is talking to Jonathan, his best friend here. Show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Now, for us, that sounds like a really strong statement for David to say, if I'm guilty, kill me yourself. But David and Jonathan, they made a covenant with each other. And the covenantal language is, I'm making a promise to you with my word on my life. And so what David is saying here, he says, Jonathan, listen, I've done my best to serve you. He says, if I'm guilty, if I'm in the wrong here, you need to tell me. If this is something that I'm doing that's destructive, Jonathan, speak truth into my life. And friendships that are deep and friendships that are lasting and friendships that are formative are relationships where we open up our lives to candor and allow others to speak truthfully into our lives. In the New Testament, Paul says it this way. He says, speaking the truth in love in Ephesians 4. We're called to be people who speak truth lovingly into the life of another. Now, Proverbs highlights why this is so important. Proverbs 27:5 says it this way. It says, better is open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. It also says it this way, Proverbs 29:5, those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets for their feet. Candor is hard because on the other side of candor is the potential for conflict. I had a dear friend of mine who was in a dating relationship that was absolutely toxic for him. But he had come out of a difficult season of life, and for the first time, he seemed happy. And so I watched him be in this destructive relationship that he was justifying in his mind, but I could see it tearing him apart. And I remember at one moment he asked me, he goes, what do you think about this? And I should have told him right there, listen, I don't think she has your best interest at heart. I don't think this is healthy. And I didn't do that. And I don't know how much time in my mind, maybe it was a year, I don't know. He came back to me and he says, why didn't anybody tell me? Why did no one tell me that that wasn't good? And it's because I didn't have the courage to be candid and to tell him this thing that you're doing that you seem happy in the moment, it's not good. And he knew it wasn't good. He knew that relationship was toxic, and I didn't have the courage to tell him, listen, this isn't good. And so there was more damage that was done in his life, because the truth is, Proverbs 29:5, those who flatter their neighbors, if I just tell them what they want to hear, I'm spreading a net, I'm spreading a trap for that person. Because if we love somebody well, love means speaking truth into their life. But here's what happens, right? These three things are not independent of one another. When you have a sense of constancy in someone's life, it creates the context in which truth-telling can happen. Because what happens is that constancy builds trust, and then it creates the opportunity and the responsibility to speak into someone's life. Because as you spend time with them over a long span of time, you build a sense of respect. This person knows that you were someone who can be trusted. And so when you are a constant presence relationally in someone's life, you build the trust, you build the respect, you have opportunity to speak truth. And I would argue, based on Proverbs 29:5, we have the responsibility to speak candidly into someone's life. And listen, here's where we wrestle, right? We're a generation of hot takes and mic drops. We like to say offensive things and then walk away like, hey, there's no consequences. It has consequences, saying that this is not saying hard things. This is speaking critical truth for the well-being of another. That's totally different, right? Because where there's friendship, it says, I am concerned about what this does to your heart because, right? Get it? I'm emotionally intentional. So where constancy is connected to candor is connected to this idea of intentionality, because when we're intentional relationally, spiritually, and emotionally, it tells us how to be candid with that friend. It tells us when to be candid with that friend, and it tells us why it matters, right? The reason that we speak truth is because relationally, it deepens the friendship. Spiritually, it cultivates a closeness to Christ, right? We're helping them find strength in God. And emotionally, it says, I am looking out for your well-being. I am concerned about your flourishing. I'm concerned that your heart is doing well. And when we have constancy with a person over time, it helps us understand how to be intentional with that person that we're building a friendship with. And listen, here's why I think this is so important. Marriage is a beautiful, amazing relational dynamic. This same dynamic has to exist in a healthy marriage. And the problem is we don't spend time cultivating this dynamic in healthy relationships through friendships. And so it comes time to enter a significant dating relationship, and we don't have any idea how to do this because we haven't cultivated the practice. And by the way, at the heart of all of this is the love of Christ. You want to know how is this possible to live with this kind of humility that's this others-oriented? The Gospel of John says, greater love has no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. And Jesus demonstrates that for us when he lays down his life on the cross. And you want to know what it is to love? Jesus demonstrates that for us, and it's his grace that empowers us to live this way well. Let me leave you with some application stuff. I know the band's going to come up in a second, and as they make their way up, I just want to leave you with some concrete things. So here's 4 things that I think you can do. Number 1 is be intentional with someone this week. Someone maybe that you sort of have a relationship with, you're sort of friends, but most of your conversation has been pretty surface level. Be intentional with them this week. Ask them to go grab coffee or shoe baskets or do whatever. Secondly is this, ask an intentional question. What's an intentional question? Maybe it's something like, hey, what's God doing in your heart and life? One of the questions that Dave often asks me is, what did you learn about yourself this week? Man, that's a tough question sometimes. What is God revealing to you about yourself? What is an area that you need to deal with that you haven't been dealing with? Thirdly is this, After asking an intentional question, I call it asking the second question. And what I mean by that is push in. When you ask somebody the question, hey, what's God doing in your heart and life? As they respond to you, consistently push in and say, oh man, like you said, God is really bringing the word alive for you this week. What does that look like? What's a passage of scripture that's just really impacted you? You had a tough conversation with your parents this week. Like, what was that like? How's your heart in the middle of that? Push in, ask the next question that allows the conversation to continue. And finally is this, just listen well. Somebody, I don't remember who, but somebody said that listening and loving are so close that few people can tell the difference. In that moment, suspend your agenda, listen well to the heart of that person. And as God brings the opportunity, speak truth and encouragement into the life of that person. I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to spend a couple minutes in just prayerful reflection, and then the band is going to lead us in another moment of worship. Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you for the truth of your word. I thank you for the beauty and the gift of relationship. Jesus, I just keep thinking of this moment in the Gospel of John when you're talking to the disciples, and you look at them and you said, I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know the master's will. But Jesus, you looked at your disciples and you said, I now call you friends. And Father, I pray that we would come to terms with this idea that to practice friendship is to live out with other people what you invite us into with yourself, Jesus. And that is mind-boggling to me, that the God of all creation, it's not just that you love us, Jesus, it's that you like us, you desire to be with us. And so God, I pray that as we experience your love as your friends, as your children, God, I pray that that love would become transformative in how we do friendships and relationships with the people that you have brought into our life. God, can I just ask tonight for the grace to be courageous, to push into the friendships that you're calling us to? Let us be attentive to the movement of your Spirit this week. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.